Subscribers in the UK may be aware of a very depressing story related to crime that happened a couple of days ago. Basically, an 80-year-old man was killed in a park in Leicester by a group of children. Children. I was going to say teenagers, but they're so young that some of them basically were not even teenagers, 12 years old. I mean, this is horrendous. This is a picture of the victim on the cover of the Times. This old man was Bhim Kohli, whom neighbours described as a lovely old man. And you know, there's something. I'm going to read out some of the report here, some of the context. But often when it comes to crime, I get very angry. With this one, it's almost beyond that. It's almost just a sense of perplexity. Like there's something at evil. There's something evil at play here. Evil. And it's hard to fathom. Anyway, I'm going to read out a bit of the report. I won't read everything just for time reasons, but the report's by Ben Ellery, Charlie Parker, and Lauren Sleater. 5 children have been arrested on suspicion of murder after an 80-year-old grandfather was attacked while walking his dog in a park on Sunday. Bhim Kohli, a father of 4, was seriously assaulted by a group of young people in Braunston, Leicestershire, before they left the scene and emergency services arrived. A boy and 2 girls aged 12 and a boy and a girl aged 14 were being questioned by Leicestershire police last night after being arrested on suspicion of murder. Neighbours said Kohli, who was of Indian heritage and had lived in the area for 40 years, had been targeted before the attack, with stones thrown at him. The arrests are the latest in a number of high-profile cases involving children. About 59,000 children aged 10 to 17, I'm going to come back to that point regarding the age, were arrested in the year to March 2023, a 9% increase in the previous 12 months. The numbers being sentenced for a crime rose by 8% over the same period, the first year-on-year increase for 10 years. Yesterday, 2 boys appeared in court charged with the murder of a 13-year-old in Oldbury near Birmingham. Last month, an 11-year-old child was arrested in suspicion of joining the riots that spread across Britain after the Southport stabbings. In Braunston, residents describe Kohli, who used to own a clothing factory, as a much-loved figure who had 3 allotments. He was found by his daughter Susan, 50, after she heard a commotion at about half 6 p.m. by the entrance of Franklin Park. She found him in the park lying on the ground under a tree. And this is a picture of the area that's happened. Um, it's I won't read out the whole report, but it's simply horrendous. What one of the neighbours said, say Deep Singh Kalia, 70, a neighbour who had known Kohli for more than 30 years, said he was such a lovely guy. It's a horrible shock. I would meet up with him every day. We were both originally from Punjab in India. He loved his allotment and loved his dog and loved his family. He used to own a factory that made jumpers and cardigans. I don't know why anyone would have wanted to do something like this to him. He was a very nice man who wouldn't have done anything to provoke this. He was joking all the time. I don't know anyone who had a problem with him. Um, the report also says that Leicestershire Police voluntarily referred themselves to the Independent Office of Police Conduct because officers had previously been in contact with the victim. It's not to suggest they necessarily done anything wrong, but the victim also was with his dog, Rocky, seriously injured under a tree after being attacked. Yeah, that's it doesn't say if the dog was injured as well. I imagine the dog was barking and um you know what can one say when you have a situation of I'll just reiterate what the follow up here was. Yesterday, Leicester police opened a murder investigation and arrested 5 children, 3 of whom, 2 girls and a boy aged 12. A boy and a girl aged 14 were also arrested. Now, I would say 12 is clearly children, 14 even as well. But you know, the information here about 59,000 children aged 10 to 17. You know, there's a real problem with this. I'm going to get into the specifics in this case, and the wider issues in a minute, but I would say the issue of age is very important. In England and Wales, the age of criminal liability is 11. Some might say that's too young, but that is the law. Um, Yet we see different attitudes regarding, those under 18. So, for example, some police forces will say a 16-year-old man was arrested. Another source will say the 17-year-old boy. So there seems to be a lack of consistency in attitudes to this. If the law deems an 11-year-old to be criminally liable, clearly an 11-year-old is a child. But I think there needs to be, the language needs to change, young offenders versus, you know, you get this situation of a child arrested, but I wouldn't call a 17-year-old a child. I wouldn't call a 16-year-old a child. They're a minor in the eyes of the law. But I honestly think if you ask most people, a gang of 16-year-olds going around drinking, swearing at strangers, they're young, but I would call them young offenders. They're teenagers. I wouldn't call a 16-year-old a child. Um, a 12-year-old for sure. So anyway, I think the terminology needs to be more consistent. Um, but I think probably what happened in this case, it's just happened, so there will be more coming out of it. But the fact that he'd previously been harassed, neighbours have said it's a quiet area, but antisocial behaviour has increased. I suspect what probably happened was he targeted this man previously, hence his communication with the police. Apparently, they'd thrown stones at them at him. I suspect what happened was they recognized him in the park and they thought he's the guy that told the police on us, so let's lay into him. But there's something fundamentally evil here. Aside from the obvious killed a man, the utter lack of fear of consequences. The utter lack of fear of consequences. I've long argued there should be tougher penalties for young offenders. I think part of the problem is young offenders do know that the law is soft on them, and they do know that if they do something terrible, they'll get a community sentence. I don't know what the outcome's going to be here. It won't be a community sentence, it probably will be some form of custody. I am not proposing 12-year-olds go to an adult prison, but I would certainly put them in a young offenders institute for a very, very long time. Um, what would be a disgrace is if these children were given a tap on the wrist. A man has lost his life. His family will be going through an appalling experience, mental anguish, utter. I mean, one can only imagine what that's like. It goes without saying the parents of these children need to absolutely be scrutinized and potentially arrested. I mean, 6:30 p.m. It's not that late. And this is a question, if this park is close to where these youngsters live, then 6:30 isn't particularly late. But there is something else at play here. This desensitization to violence, this absolute lack of fear of consequences. There's no fear of the police, no fear of adults telling them off. So a vulnerable old man on his own with his dog doesn't say what sort of dog it was. I hope the dog bit the little shit. But um, I just find it so thoroughly depressing. I mean, it would be bad enough if a gang of adult thugs attacked him and mugged him. That would be evil and awful. But the gang of adult men would face years behind bars. But children, chances are that it'll be a much more lenient sentence. Again, I'm not proposing they go to the same jail as adults. But what would be a disgrace is if the attitude was, well, they're children, so we better not punish them. Because it would send out the wrong message. It would be a failure of justice towards Mr. Kohli's family, but also it would send out the message to other young offenders: you can kill someone and basically nothing will happen to you, or nothing proportionate to the level. I mean, there needs to be a real reevaluation of how young offenders are treated, because in this country it's just too damn lenient. Um, One issue is the issue of adults defending themselves. Now, I'm a 39-year-old, fairly strong, healthy young man. If I were to be attacked by a group of youngsters and I defended myself, I'd punch them or the chances are I would be arrested for assault. That is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. Um, so a vulnerable old man has no chance. I'm just picturing myself in this situation. If I was attacked by a gang of 16-year-olds, I'd be, a 16-year-old could be pretty strong. 12-year-old less so. I could probably somewhat defend myself, although I'd be disgusted and, shocked by what transpired. A gang of 16-year-olds could, I'll just say it, they could probably kill me. Because as much as I would fight like a tiger, I'm not saying this, by the way, to be flippant or to be, you know, oh, I would do that, but I do. I've had experience of crime and I put myself in this situation. And what is absolutely wrong is this idea that if the adults cannot fight back, the adults have to put up with the level of. I mean, you see the symptoms of this. In Sunderland, I see mostly boys, some girls as well. They go around in big groups and they're really young. I'm not talking 18-year-olds here, I'm talking 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And you just can tell that they're up to no good because as soon as there's community police officers around anywhere, they'll immediately put up their hoods and scanter away. But they mouth off to strangers. They just throw rubbish on the ground, and these things may seem trivial compared to what's happened in Leicester, but I think it's all a progression of utter immunity and no fear. This is why I think, I mean, obviously the circumstances here will need to be looked at. If you have a 12-year-old, and let's say they have a heroin addict for a mother and a burglar for a father who's serving prison time, clearly that child's going to be messed up. That goes without saying. So absolutely, I'm not, dismissing root causes, but justice is extremely important, and victims of crime need to have justice. So after the fact, you need to address the root causes, but after the fact, there has to be punishment that fits the crime. And I would say in this case, the ringleader, the 14-year-old, I would honestly give him 15 to 20 years in the Young Offenders Institute with no early release because that 14-year-old is dangerous. That's a sad reality. I don't think you can rehabilitate a young teenager who is going to kill a stranger. This is the thing. The left will say, oh, we shouldn't jail children. We should try and get them to see the error of the ways, try and rehabilitate them in the community. That approach, I'm afraid, just doesn't work. When you get to this level, when they're prepared to kill a stranger, not just mouth off, not just, you know, the fact they threw stones at this man, it's just horrendous. Leicester police, I'm not going to criticise them because I don't know the circumstances of this case, although there was another case involving Leicestershire police about 15 years ago. Fiona Pilkington, I remember it well. She was a woman who, I believe both her and her daughter, or one of them, maybe it was the mother or the daughter, but one of them had learning difficulties, and local youth gangs tormented them and tormented them and tormented them, and the police attitude was dismissive. And eventually ended up taking their own lives because um, they were so hounded and so in despair of the antisocial behaviour they were facing. Make no mistake about it, antisocial behaviour destroys lives. And rather than focusing on non-crime hate incidents, there's also a report in the Times about that, which I'll come to. Police need to seriously prioritise antisocial behaviour, and the police need more power to apprehend young offenders. Of course, you don't want a situation where there's an abuse of power, but I mean, there's been controversy over strip searches of children. But I think where you have a situation where there's credible evidence, for example, that a young person is carrying a weapon, then for the sake of that young person themselves and for other teenagers, the police have to be empowered to act on that. In this country, you see it across the board. You see it in schools. Teachers are frightened to do anything in case the parents sue them. You know, um, Teachers have their hands tied, so they can't act against bullies because there's so much hypersensitivity over. Oh, you better not, scare young people. You better. I take this view that There obviously has to be common sense in how things are approached. But one thing I'm absolutely convinced about is that young offenders in this country have a sense of immunity. That has to change. So punishments need to be increased. The justice establishment needs to get the hell out of the bubble that it is in, start living in the real world, start to understand that the public need to be protected. And of course, you approach a young offender differently than you would an adult offender. I'm not proposing these young killers go to an adult prison, but I do think they should go to a young offenders institute, a young offenders prison for a very long time, particularly the ringleader. Um, it's and that might sound harsh, but what is the alternative? The alternative is having kids in the community who have no fears of killing a stranger, i.e., they could do it again. The public have a right to be protected. Mr. Coley's neighbours, understandably, will be scared. Um, it says here one of his neighbours mentions, my 16-year-old walks through the park every day on his way to and from school, but now I've told him he goes nowhere without me. And this is a point, those who say, oh, stigmatizing young people. Some of the main victims of young offenders are other young people. It's this awful case has to be a wake up call. There has to be tougher penalties, but there also has to be a change in the attitude of because they're young, we're not going to hold them to account, or you know, rehabilitation first and only. It's Of course, you have to look at the root causes. And if there are situations where a young offender can see the light and they can kind of be guided in the right direction, then maybe some sort of community sentence is the better option. But I make the case that where you have a situation where they have no fear of the police, no fear of adults, do people seriously think they're going to take a community sentence seriously? This is what I would say to the left. You say that prison's a failure, but is community sentencing so successful? If you have a young offender who has been given that sentence and they laugh at it, literally, is that working? Clearly it isn't. I just feel so much sympathy for this man's family because the mental anguish, the pain that they will be going through must be horrendous. They have absolutely every right to see some real justice in this case. I mean, these kids need to know you've done this terrible thing, you've taken a man's life, you're going to pay for it. And their parents, if if there's signs that they have, I mean, what sort of parent brings up a child like this? I think I'd like to see some arrests of the parents as well. People often say, it's not the parents, but I don't believe that you can have a 14-year-old killer and the parents know nothing about it. They know nothing about how that teenager is turning out. I don't believe that they be completely oblivious to it. Of course, it needs to be looked at. Each case has its own distinctive characteristics, but it's utterly depressing. And I just hope that his family can get some degree of, I won't say closure at this point, but some degree of a sense that they're going to see justice. Otherwise, you have a situation where violent, dangerous young offenders are free to terrorize the public. That is wrong. The police need to be more empowered to act on this, and the police need to act on it and not prioritise non-crime hate incidents. And judges need to get themselves into the real world, as does the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, which is pathetic, in my opinion.